Michael Smith, please tell us about you.
Okay, sure. I've been interested in reptiles and amphibians since I was about 9 or 10 years old, and went from just kind of being interested in snakes to hanging out at the museum in Fort Worth and learning more. And the kind of the lens widened, and I got more interested in more stuff and understood the big picture more and thought I was going to be a biologist, but nope, that didn't happen. I actually wound up going into psychology. That was my career, and I'm retired now, but that was my career. But I was interested in reptiles and amphibians kind of all the way through, especially since about the late 90s. And I've written a couple of books, popular books about it, a third book about mindfulness in nature. But at any rate, I've spent a lot of time in the field, and so I'm a big herp fan. Um, anyway, that's me.
Okay.
Um, and I want to talk about conservation issues in Texas with herps. Um, Lots of people are interested in frogs and snakes and turtles, and not all we don't always think about the conservation part of that, but it's an important story. It's an important that we do what we can to make things better. So just a really quick review of the animals that we call herps. The On the left are the amphibians, which are frogs and toads, and salamanders, and Sicilians, which are funny looking legless critters that live in the tropics in a lot of places. We do not have any in North America, so I'm not talking about them, but that's the third group of amphibians. On the right, oh, and the photo below is a marbled salamander. On the right, we have turtles and tortoises, and then crocodilians, tuataras, which is a weird little dinosaur-like, it really looks kind of like a weird lizard, from the islands just north of New Zealand. So we don't run into those very much except at the zoo. And then lizards and snakes. So the photo of a broad-headed skink down below that shows the reptiles. So that's what we're dealing with. And what we're here tonight to do is to ask what's happening to herps. So, in addition to the widely known amphibian extinction crisis, reptiles as a group are declining too, and Texas is not spared. We have plenty of animals that are in trouble. Now, let's starting at the top here. Parks and Wildlife has a list of species of greatest conservation need, and that's Texas contribution to a national database. And so the Texas list shows 64 total herp species. Not all of those, not by any stretch, have any degree of protection. It's simply a list of species that really need more conservation attention. And then there's amphibian declines, uh, which are worldwide and with some in Texas. So in Texas, we have 18 frog, toad, and salamander species shown as threatened or endangered. Uh, and then there's other species like the Woodhouse's toad that are on that list of species of greatest conservation need, but are not listed as threatened or endangered. So it becomes kind of weird and difficult to sort out, what's on the list, what's actually in trouble in Texas, but that's a good start at doing it. Similarly, with reptile declines, reptiles are in trouble worldwide. You could single out turtles as a particular concern, but really all the reptiles um, groups have some degree of concern about declines. So in Texas here, there's 19 turtle, snake, and lizard species that are shown as threatened or endangered. And then there's others like the dune sagebrush lizard and box turtles that are on that species of greatest conservation need. Um, and the even weirder thing is the dune sagebrush lizard has recently been finally listed under the Endangered Species Act as an endangered animal. And we'll get to that. We'll talk about that particular lizard later on. So anyway, that may leave it kind of confusing, but that's the situation. We have different lists showing different levels of concern, I guess, with different species. So look at this guy. You remember these guys? This is an ornate box turtle, as the title shows. So think for a second, when did you last see one? And where was it that you saw one? So box turtles still occasionally turn up, but they're in trouble. They're in trouble pretty much nationwide. I'm talking about the North American box turtles. And declines have been documented in a lot of different places. And there's a number of reasons why these turtles are in trouble. Now, and by in trouble, I don't mean that you don't ever see them anymore. It just means that you sure don't see them like you used to. And a lot of the threat involves things like road mortality. Raise your hand. I mean that sarcastically because I can't see you on there, but think about how many times, if you're older, if you're somewhere close to my age bracket, did you drive somewhere and see box turtles along the side of the road like every couple of miles? And some of us can remember that time in Texas. We don't see that anymore, but what we would also see is a lot of turtles run over. Um, and that was one source of the problem. Another source of the problem is the box turtles. People tend to like box turtles, and Europe likes box turtles. They liked them as pets, and tons of them got picked up and collected and sold to be shipped off to places like Europe as pets, where most of them, no doubt, died. If you were a serious hobbyist and really knew how to take care of box turtles, maybe you made it work. But most box turtles get picked up as a casual pet, not really taken care of, and waste away and die. And it takes a long time. For a long time, it'll look like the turtle's doing pretty good. But they get lighter and lighter. They don't eat very well. They get more lethargic and eventually die unless you really know about taking care of them. So, as you can see, I'm not a huge fan of box turtles in the pet trade, right? But pet trade and road mortality. But then there's also habitat loss, and there's also stuff like fire ants. And also, we don't really know too well. Like nobody's going to be able to sit here. So, Viviana's in here representing Texas Turtles, and the Texas Turtles folks could give you some real specific answers. But I think what they would say is it's a complicated question. A lot of things contribute, and nobody knows for sure exactly how much each thing contributes. But basically, because of a number of things, box turtles are in trouble. So, and that's sad because I loved seeing those things. Lots of you enjoyed seeing them. I know a lot of people that say their interest in reptiles got started picking up a box turtle at the side of the road or getting your parents to do that when you were a kid. So I hate to I hate to see them decline, but they are not what they used to be. Um, so um, and let's look at this. There are at least a couple of major lists that show the conservation status of various species. So and not just reptiles, I mean mammals and fish and all kinds of things. One of them is called NatureServe. NatureServe apparently originated out of some of the efforts of the Nature Conservancy. It became NatureServe around the year 2000. And the website says that we work with about 60 plus network organizations and nearly 1,000 conservation professionals to collect, analyze, and deliver biodiversity knowledge. In other words, NatureServe is not just some dude. It's a kind of a collective effort pooling information. Now, over at the right, you see a map, and it's showing the status, according to them, of the ornate box turtle. And you see there's a kind of a standard over to the right, ranging from critically imperiled all the way to secure, or there could be no status rank, we just don't know, and all of that. So it says that in Texas, The ornate box turtle is vulnerable. Um, and I guess what that might mean is that in some places you still find them not too uncommonly. Other places you're not going to find many at all. So nature serve is one of the ways we can look up an animal, a species, and know how it's doing. Another is the International Union for Conservation of Nature. So it maintains a thing called the Red List. And once again, it says that our members include expert and influential government, non-government, indigenous peoples organizations from over 160 countries, yada yada. So it's a worldwide thing. You could look up, the Bengal tiger. Here I've looked up the ornate box turtle, and again it has a kind of a scale to show its rating of how they think the animal is doing. It could be data deficient, where they just don't know, but it ranges from least concern all the way to an extinct or extinct in the wild. So they consider the ornate box turtle near threatened, and I think that would depend very much on where you look. There are places where, as you saw in the nature surf thing, where it's in a lot of trouble, and other places where it's a bit more secure. Um, okay, so again, looking at how do we know their status. Um, For many species, simply we don't. But how would we know? So we can't just do the thing like that I would note, my recollection of box turtles and say, yeah, we used to see them all the time. Now we hardly see them. Well, that's not much information, right? That's not enough to know how they're doing. We need to measure change over time and over large areas. So if we want to know about box turtles, I mean, people have got to go out and measure what are you finding, and it can't be just on one day. It's got to be over time, and it's got to be statewide or bigger, or over regions that can be reported. So, there's a lot of work that goes into it. One way to find is to find the same animals over time. So you can mark them in some way. Some people radio track, well, box turtles, for example. You implant a radio, stick it on the top shell of those guys, and then graduate students or researchers can go out in the field periodically with a radio unit and find them again. So it's like, okay, turtle number such and such. We found for the fifth year in a row or whatever. Um, or you can train dogs to find turtles. And you can do other things with other animals. We'll talk about horned lizards. Those, well, anyway, we'll get to that. You can track animals over time and see how are they doing. Are they still turning up? You can also look at size and age classes. So, for example, if well, let's stick with box turtles for a moment. If all you see are adult box turtles, um, that would be of concern to me. I think it would be of concern to people that know more than me, because box turtles live a long time. And if there's too few of them now to be a reproductive population, then you might still see adults turning up, but not enough to breed. And so the population is reproductively dead. It's only just marking time while the clock times out, and that animal will be gone. So looking at new generations, are you finding young ones? Are you finding babies? That's a helpful thing when you're trying to monitor these things. So it takes lengthy, labor-intensive field research. And we'll talk later about stuff like iNaturalist, to look at is community science, citizen science, like iNaturalist helping. I know a lot of people, serious folks, who say, yes, it is. It's very valuable. Um, okay. Uh, let's look at one of my favorite herps that I have kind of a thing about, and that's the Texas garter snake. We're within the range of this snake, which means that um, you might run across one. Texas garter snakes, and you might check and make sure you're muted if you need to be muted. Anyway, Texas garter snakes seem to like prairie, including savanna openings within the cross timbers. cross timbers being the oak woodlands and prairies that we have around Dallas, Fort Worth, and parts westward, and in the Blacklands some too. So they like prairies, cross timbers when they're near a creek and a pond. Now, the thing you have to do is to not confuse it with the more common ribbon snake. So ribbon snakes you'll find around here, and they don't have, if you notice this guy's face, it has little black markings along the lip sutures. So just under the eye, the lips are not plain bluish. They've got little black sutures. That would tell you it's a garter snake. Also, the lateral stripe. I know this is nerd stuff. Oh man, if you're not really into Texas garter snakes, your eyes may glaze over a bit, but bear with me. One of the way you can tell it's not a ribbon snake is the lateral line, the side stripe, looks kind of ragged. That's because it's on scale rows 2, 3, and 4. It's a little wider, whereas the ribbon snake is only on 3 and 4, and it looks really clean. So there's some differences by which you can tell Texas garters from ribbon snakes. The Texas garter is critically imperiled. So their range includes a band within central and north Texas that's being heavily developed. So that's one thing we would look at, is that, a lot of that land is being developed or maybe degraded, in other words, changed in a way that it doesn't work very well. They are too uncommon for the wild pet trade to be much of a factor. Um, Habitats are being built on, they're cultivated for crops. Fire ants and climate change could be issues. There's some folks that worked on these guys and could find none during the 2013, 2014 study period. And then they do occasionally, like if you do a search on iNaturalist, you will turn up some Texas garter snakes in this area. And I've looked at a lot of those records, and they are Texas, the ones I looked at are Texas garter snakes. So it's not like they've disappeared, but they've never been common in my experience. Getting out in the field since, the mid 60s, I've found them never to have been common. And that makes them really hard to study. I mean, if you can't find any, it's kind of hard to study them, right? Um, so that's the deal with the Texas garter snake. It is not protected in any way by Parks and Wildlife. It is on that list of the species of greatest conservation need, but it's not protected. Okay, so let's look at what the threats are to these to various reptiles and amphibians. Any of you who are fellow herp nerds might know the article from the year 2000 by Whit Gibbons and a bunch of other people. And it listed the biggest threats faced by reptiles. So this is and the same list works pretty well for amphibians and really for a lot of different kinds of animals. So this is a good kind of way to keep track of what are the things that these animals are facing that tends to make them decline. Everybody I talked to, I mean, serious conservation people, biologists, people that know a lot more than me, would say that habitat loss and degradation, that's the big one. That's probably the biggest deal. But a lot of these things are interrelated. Um, there's introduced invasive species like the fire ant, that may be predators that they're not evolved to deal with. There's environmental pollution, which goes along with habitat loss and degradation, doesn't it? There's disease and parasitism, um, which may be triggered by environmental changes. So all these are interrelated things. And then there's unsustainable use, by which that means collection for the pet trade. Turtles have really, really suffered from collection, a lot of it being for the exotic meat trade, and are shipped overseas. Um, and then global climate change. And one of the ways being, for example, that some of the herp species have temperature dependent sex determination. It means, for example, if you're looking at some of the turtles, have patterns in which nests incubated above a certain temperature are going to be mostly females, And I think I'm remembering this correctly, above versus below. And at the other temperature range, they'll be mostly males. So you get climate change and you get consistently higher nest temperatures. You'll skew the population to one sex and you won't get as much reproduction and things begin to crash. So there's just so many interrelated things, right? Um, so let's look at a couple of things with regard to disease. One of them is snake fungal disease. So where fungi are getting a bad rap, and in this case, maybe a deserved bad rap, right? We all know about white nose syndrome in bats, other kinds of things that are based on fungal diseases. Snake fungal disease, Ophidiomyces ophidiocola, has been detected in East Texas, so not all over Texas. And really, I don't think we know yet how widespread this illness is, but it's a fungal disease that results in skin lesions in snakes, and it's often fatal. Now, a lot of um, a lot of snakes coming out of hibernation will have skin sores of one kind or another. Their metabolism has been low. Their immune system then doesn't work very well. They've maybe been cold and wet, so they get skin sores. But those usually resolve after the first shed. Snake fungal disease is different, um, but it may be hard to differentiate. Like if I picked up a snake with sores on it, I would be hard pressed to know what's what. A lot of times, what happens is we send samples off to a lab to try to see, is this really snake fungal disease? Because it is a serious threat to snakes. Again, it's typically fatal. Here's the one that a lot of you will know about, and that's chytridiomycosis, or chytrid for short. It's an infectious disease of amphibians. And the one that's best known is I will shorten it to BD. It's a Batrachochytrium dendrobatidis, if I'm saying that right. But it's a fungus that infects the skin of frogs. It interferes with electrolyte transfer. It's a fatal disease. It has run rampant through some tropical places and killed off lots of things. The golden toad, for example, some of you may have heard about. There's a lots of extinctions that are attributable to this disease. It does require bodies of water. In other words, the fungus lives in water. It dies at temperatures above 82 degrees, which probably has made Texas a little less of a problem for chytrid because our temperatures are so high. Um, there's a related fungus, the salamandrivorans or bee sow, that can infect salamanders. That originated supposedly in China and was spread to Europe by way of the pet trade and has really just devastated some of the salamanders in Europe. The fear among biologists is that it may reach the United States. It hasn't, as far as I know, or as far as we know. I don't. What I've seen, looking around at organizations, is that people don't know if it's here yet. It apparently isn't here yet. We hope it is not here yet. But, the pet trade, there's nothing wrong with people keeping a few animals, but the pet trade is a real villain with some of these conservation issues. And that's very much true here. If there was no pet trade for amphibians, then bee cell would not have spread. Same with chytrid. The thought is that chytrid would not have spread as wide as it has been without either pet trade or maybe the trade in bullfrogs. And also the other thing that's implicated is the clawed frog, I think it was, used to be used in pregnancy tests. And clawed frogs and bullfrogs are immune, but can carry chytrid. So the human trade in animals moves these things around. And so then you go from there. Um, so anyway, that is potentially a huge issue for our amphibians. Okay, a huge part of conservation is figuring out how to manage, educate, motivate, and take care of ourselves and to be informed without being overwhelmed. I have a quote here that I'll take a moment to read. It's Joanna Macy and Molly Brown from a book, a wonderful book called Coming Back to Life, which I highly recommend. And it speaks to the issues, not, of course, this is not about herp conservation, it's about everything going on in the world today. And when you think about it, I mean, really, you guys think about everything that we're facing in the world, and it just comes at us from all kinds of directions. And so they say that the perils facing life on Earth are so massive and unprecedented that they are hard to even take in. And they basically make us want to pull down the blinds and busy ourselves with other things. And if that happens, so many things will disappear. And certainly with herps, that will happen if we just become so overwhelmed that we haven't got the bandwidth anymore. We can't do it, and we need to go distract ourselves. Um, so at the end, I want to talk just a little bit about a couple of things that might help. So this is Woodhouse's toad. I mentioned that earlier as on the species of greatest conservation need. So it's a face that only a mom and maybe a few humans could love. I don't know. It's this one's pretty cute, but um, to most people, reptiles and amphibians are among the less charismatic animals. And a few of them can hurt us, so that doesn't help their cause at all, right? Um, so we conserve what we love, and we're wired to love some more than others. Animals with strange faces and mixed and fixed expressions and unusual body forms, those don't pull us in so much unless they're really beautiful to look at or to hear. So a rattlesnake isn't likely to pull us in the same way. But y'all means all, borrowing from the a phrase going around, a good phrase going around, right? Even when it's not obvious what ecosystem services a species may provide. So, we can argue that rattlesnakes eat rodents and do a lot of, they provide us the service of controlling agricultural pests, and their venom is a source of medicine, and etc. But really, messing around with biodiversity is like playing a game of Jenga. Anybody ever play Jenga? Some of you may know that game. You stack up, this tower of wooden blocks, right? And the point is you take turns pulling out a block, and you keep going until it collapses. So you pull out a block, and if the tower's still standing, you're good. It goes on to the next person. But it's at every time that you do that, every block you pull out, and every species we lose weakens the whole thing more and becomes more unstable. And eventually the thing can collapse. So I think really it's like a Jenga game in a lot of ways. There's the quote down at the bottom by Aldo Leopold. And if you don't know Aldo Leopold, I heartily suggest that you get to know him through the Sand County Almanac and that's those sort of writings. And he said if the land mechanism as a whole is good, then every part is good, whether we understand it or not. So if the biota, in other words, if life, if the ecosystem in the course of all this time has built something that we like, but we do not understand, then who but a fool would discard seemingly useless parts? So in other words, the deal is, even if we're not sure why it matters, even if it seems like a small, no big deal species, we ought to think of it that way, that the whole thing depends on the integrity of the system, and we ought not to throw away seemingly useless parts. So we might say that we love them all, but take a moment with this exercise. I want you to do a thought exercise just for a moment. I want you to choose a logo animal. So suppose you're starting a conservation nonprofit. You need a species to personify your effort. And you want to pull people in, you want to get donations, all that. Take a moment. What do you choose to go on your logo and to feature in your work with the public? And you're probably thinking that it needs to pull in people's care and compassion. So what are you going to pick? Hmm. So I'll bet you didn't pick the tooth cave pseudoscorpion, which is an endangered species. It deserves our attention. It's probably not going on your logo. Maybe the Austin blind salamander, little pale guys with no eyes and funky gills. Yeah, probably not. maybe a cute panda, right? You all know the cute panda, and that pulls people in. If you're going to be a major organization, that might figure into your thinking. I'm not criticizing the World Wildlife Fund. I'm really just saying that we're wired to be drawn to certain species more than others and to care about certain species more than others. So, strange faces, fixed expressions, unusual body forms. Oh my God, it doesn't get much more weird than this, right? This is the alligator snapping turtle. And I want to tell you that my friends at Texas Turtles, which is our local turtle research and conservation organization, man, they were bold enough to choose this animal on their logo because it's just so cool and so big and so amazing. But it really doesn't draw in a lot of compassion, does it? I mean, they love them, so do I. But uh, it's our largest um, freshwater turtle in North America. Males reach as much as 211 pounds in Texas. And the females are a little smaller, and most of them aren't that big. Uh, but they're enormous turtles. They live in like deeper rivers and oxbow lakes and waterways. They have a relatively short neck and a short reach, but the bite is a big deal. I mean, if you look at that big old hooked jaws and crushing jaw surfaces, there is a published report of one near total finger amputation from one. So now they don't go looking for people to attack, right? But if you go messing with them, if you pull one out of the water, if you handle it, it will attempt to bite you if it can, just to try to defend itself. They have a shorter reach than the common snapping turtle, but man, if they get you, it's a big deal. So, um, but this is an animal that has been protected for a long time. Texas Turtles has been researching them for years and contributing to our knowledge of this animal. So because of where they live, a lot of people don't see them. People who are fishing may see them, but a lot of people don't see them, and they might assume whether you may never think of them, you may never have seen one. But what the research from Carl and Viviana and Sal suggests is that it's not so much that they are disappearing, it's that they're just hard to find and cryptic and or hidden rather. But what they tell us is that the main threats to alligator snapping turtles include poaching. So if people come over from Louisiana where they're not protected and get them in Texas and take them back and sell them, as well as picking them up on trout line fishing. So if you set a trout line and that bait just sits there, alligator snappers may take it. And if the hook stays in the animal, or if they get hooked and caught and can't come up for air or whatever, the turtle may die. So those are the biggest threats to alligator snapping turtles. It's an amazing animal, and it's nature surf says it's vulnerable. I think Texas turtles would agree that this is an animal that we need to not have poaching, and we need to not have them picked up out of trout line fishing. They're found in mainly East Texas, like the Trinity River watershed, and eastward, and then through the southeastern states. Okay, let's look at the Endangered Species Act for a second and define endangered and threatened. So the Endangered Species Act got started in 1973. It's a federal law that's helped recover things like bald eagles and other species. It's been a very helpful thing. And one of its most important provisions is or was the designation of critical habitat, meaning if you define that this animal is in danger of extinction, you better protect the places it lives, because if you don't, it will surely disappear. So the definitions from the ESA of endangered means a species is in danger of extinction throughout all or a significant portion of its range, whereas threatened means a species is likely to become endangered within the foreseeable future. So those are the definitions within the Act. We're going to come back to the ESA in just a moment. For now, let's look at the Louisiana pine snake. Now, this might look like a bull snake, and it is a relative of the bull snake, but it has always been, where it's been found, it's always been a few places in East Texas and part of Louisiana. And it declined along with longleaf pine savannas. Now, some of you know about longleaf pine habitat that used to stretch throughout the southeastern US. It is a very endangered kind of ecosystem, and it's being protected in some places, but longleaf pine got timbered really badly, and the snake began to decline as longleaf pines were taken. Um, so they're excellent burrowers in sandy soil, and they eat a lot of pocket gophers. They spend a lot of time underground because of their being good burrowers. So people would sometimes not see them for that reason because they were, underground. But they'd move around at different times of day, get run over on the road. People would find them, but not really anymore. I talked with Toby Hibbets, who is a faculty at TAMU and a researcher on a number of threatened species and endangered species. And Toby has worked with some of the people that have worked with this snake. He told me that the only site in Texas that's being considered that, so some are being captive bred and then raised up to a certain size and then released in Louisiana to try to reestablish the Louisiana pine snake. Most biologists think that the Louisiana pine snake may be gone, simply extinct from Texas, or extirpated would be the right word, but at any rate, no longer found in Texas. Toby said that there's a highway um, by a site that's being considered for reintroduction. It's south of Sam Rayburn and in the Angelina, or south of the Angelina National Forest. So, where they used to be found was around the kind of big thicket and pine forest areas. And there's some habitat there that might work. But Toby said there's a highway that runs through it, and the last pine snakes that were found were run over on this road. And that brings up a really important thing, and that is when you want to reintroduce something where it used to live, you better make sure that uh, the place where you're going to put it will support it. Because otherwise, if you don't, it'll just disappear again. So they're not going to reintroduce Louisiana pine snakes and just have them run over and just throw them away. So who knows what will happen with Louisiana pine snakes, but they're probably gone from right now. They are, however, considered threatened in Texas and federal listings. Now that shows you how weird listing can be. An animal that's probably gone from Texas, but Texas considers it threatened, not endangered. Anyway, so listing as threatened or endangered is a political as well as a scientific fact. And that is crucially important. I think probably everybody who is on this call probably knows this, but it's a crucial thing to appreciate that adding a species to a list, calling it endangered or threatened, number one, it can imply responsibility and blame. And number two, it indicates that some action is needed. And three, needed action can interfere with what people want to do and business and making money. So it doesn't become so straightforward to say whether it's endangered or threatened. It becomes a very highly charged issue. Um, and I'll tell you that the ESA, there are recent changes under the Trump administration that are really important to understand. And probably the most important one is the definition of harm to an endangered species has been changed so that it now doesn't include habitat modification. So if you have an endangered species and it's listed and it's protected, as long as you don't go out with a shovel and chop it up, you're not going to get in trouble if you destroy its habitat. And that's crazy. It is certainly a prescription for that animal's extinction, but that is the administration under which we're living. The other recent thing that happened was that something called the Chevron doctrine got thrown out. It's easier now to challenge administrative rulemaking. So the deal is that, it used to be that when stuff would come up, the Fish and Wildlife or other professionals, wildlife professionals um, would interpret what's the law supposed to mean. That's no longer the case. Courts don't have to defer to agencies, and they can, if you get a right-wing judge, can interpret that the law means something that most of us would not say that it means. So the ESA is, I think it's fair to say, under attack. Nowhere is that more obvious than with the case of the Dunes sagebrush lizard. Um, this species is a great example of those political issues. Fish and Wildlife, after a long, contentious history, finally listed this lizard as endangered. And Texas uh, fought that. First of all, one of the things that happened with this lizard some years ago is they started dealing with endangered species under the comptroller. That was Susan Combs, who's no friend of conservation. And you would think, why would conservation stuff be dealt with under the comptroller? But of course, business, money, yeah, that's kind of the connection. Texas wanted to encourage voluntary conservation actions. In other words, the fracking folks and the people who are mining sand for fracking and the landowners out there who might want to change the habitat so they could graze some cattle, all of those people could just enter into a voluntary conservation action. And if you did that, you'd be protected from further action if the animal got listed. So that would be the motivation is, okay, I'm going to agree. And so I won't have to deal with problems if it gets listed. Um, and anyway, Lee Fitzgerald, who's another faculty along with Toby Hibbets, both Texas A&M University, they've worked with this lizard quite a bit. They've studied its needs, and at one point, they attempted to reintroduce them out in West Texas in suitable sand dune habitat, which is where they live, and that did not work. So, and I mean, I'm sure they were justified in thinking that was worth trying. They moved lizards to this seemingly adequate habitat out in the dunes. They initially did okay for a while, but then they disappeared. So transplanting them doesn't work. Um, and the lizard can't adapt to something new. I wrote about this, if you want to get into it a little further, I wrote about this in Green Source DFW, and the article is there at the website in the January issue. January of this year issue. So the dune sagebrush lizard is dependent on sand dune blowouts where shinnery oak, you see on the top of those dunes that kind of crest the vegetation, that's really a little dwarf oak tree, the shinnery oak. And then the blowout is where you get this sort of bowl-shaped depression. So you're looking at a photo of it in Monaghan Sandhill State Park. This is good dune sagebrush lizard habitat. But it's being destroyed outside of the park by sand mining for fracking. So sand, is one of the things they use in fracking. So they mine that sand, they'll suck it out of the dunes in great big industrial sites that suck sand out, and also from the infrastructure for gas drilling. So that's what's messing up the habitat for these lizards. And without the habitat, they simply will not survive. So that's the thing with the dune sagebrush lizard. So let's take a moment to think about what seemed normal and expected as you were growing up. When you think about the animals you used to see, what kind of shape was nature in when you were growing up? Some of, depending on our age, we're going to remember different things, aren't we? Like I'm going to remember a time when there was more stuff going on, more animals. Some of you who are younger, uh, what seemed normal for you, what you expect is what you've seen in your lifetime. So what we experience feels normal. It's what has always been. And so that's called shifting baseline syndrome. And so let's look at how that affects conservation efforts. Um, if if now is what you know, and so it seems normal, then it's all right. It's pretty fine, right? This is fine. Give me my cup of coffee. All those flames, yeah, it's the way it's always been. That's the problem with shifting baseline syndrome, is that our expectations for what things ought to be are very much distorted. And here's an animal that is a good example of that. I started from a baseline. I mean, I'm 74, right? So I started from a baseline in which Texas horned lizards were in backyards and parks. A lot of that kind of, I experienced a lot of those kind of things growing up. So my sense of what have we lost, my sense of how bad are things is pretty bad. It's like it is shaped by all of those things that we have lost. Um, and so what happened? Um, that is something lots of people ask about with Texas horned lizards. Oh, by the way, on the slide, you're going to see NatureServe considers them apparently secure in across various states, but vulnerable in Texas. Well, they're not vulnerable in Fort Worth anymore because they're simply gone, right? If you look at the little inset down there, it's a sleeve from a DVD that if you're really interested, I'd highly recommend that you go find this. You can still get it. It was a small indie film called Where Did the Horny Toad Go? And it's got lots of footage of horned lizards, covers a lot of their natural history, has lots of interviews with people who are scientists and people from the Horned Lizard Conservation Society and so on. Lots of great information about horned lizards that help address what we know about what happened. What happened seems to be multiple things, right? Going back to that Whit-Gibbons study, all those different factors on there, there's a number of them that are important. Habitat loss is the big one. Um, so, they can't do very well in planted pasture land of turf grass or grass that's just a forest that the lizard, it needs open spaces. Um, so um, it also needs harvester ants. Very famously, these guys eat ants, eat harvester ants in particular. Um, and there's a number of other things that have been a problem. Now, if you go out between Abilene and Lubbock, you won't have you may not have much trouble on decent ranch land finding Texas horn lizards. Um, and one area in the western Edwards Plateau is pretty decent. And there's another area in South Texas that where people have been trying to reintroduce horn lizards. Now remember, I said that if you don't do the work of making sure the habitat where it's going is okay, you might as well be throwing them away, right? So the Western Edwards Plateau is not bad in terms of the plant communities, in terms of the other animals out there, and predator-prey relationships, and all of that. And also in the South Texas plains, the San Antonio Zoo uh, got access to a pretty big stretch of land owned by Toyota with pretty good stuff, and any stuff that's well maintained ranch land may be pretty adequate for horned lizards to be reintroduced. So they're captive breeding them in the zoos, head starting them so that they're not teeny tiny babies that just get snapped up by any and everything. When they get a little bit of size on them, um, which is called head starting, then they reintroduce them, release them, and then they monitor how they're doing. And this is another one that I wrote about in Green Source DFW. If you want to look at, I think January of this year, you could find an article on horn lizards and the people that are doing the captive breeding and release. It The Fort Worth group is attaching a strip to the animals to be able to find them with some radio locating kind of equipment, basically, in a nutshell. South Texas is training dogs to find horned lizard scat and horned lizards, and you can train dogs to locate species like this quite well. It's a good method. In both places, what they have found is when they go out there now, after several years of this, they find grown-up lizards that are obviously were released. They're not because they weren't there before. And they're finding babies, which indicates that the released lizards have grown up and are reproducing. And that's kind of a gold standard for knowing if a project like this is working, is do these animals form communities that reproduce and maintain themselves. So that's looking pretty good out there. Don't look for it in, around Fort Worth and Dallas anytime soon because our habitat is just too, it's not suitable, but some places it is. Okay, so what can we do? First, there's organizations that preserve or restore habitat. Um, and those that study and advocate for the animals. And just the ones that I've listed there is it's not the only ones, but so the Nature Conservancy and Native Prairies Association of Texas, I nominated both of those because they help protect habitat. And remember, habitat is the important thing. So if they're protecting habitats, they may or may not be focused on herp species, but they're helping preserve them. And then there's a group called the Orion Society, which if you are interested, I'd encourage you to look them up. They got started preserving indigo snakes in the southeast. They've been involved in longleaf pine protection. They've been involved in reintroduction of indigo snakes where they were disappearing. They now studying and doing restoration work with some turtles and other snakes. So they do a lot of good work. I'd encourage you to support them. Amphibian and Reptile Conservancy is another group that publishes a newsletter and does some good work. Texas Turtles, I mentioned earlier, and I think you all may have had uh, maybe Carl as a speaker. Texas Turtles, headed up by Carl Franklin and Viviana Ricardes and Sal Sabetta, um, both research these animals and provide a website with lots of good information. If you need specific information about a particular Texas turtle, you can go to their website and find some good stuff. So they do some really good work, and I'd encourage you to support them as well. This is a small group. They're not getting big, huge grants or whatever. They're really relying on small scale support. So go help them out. And then of course groups like the Arlington Conservation Council. You guys do a lot of good work, and you do good work in terms of educating people, and you do good work in terms of making sure that the remnants of natural habitat in our area stay in pretty good shape. And by virtue of doing that, you're helping reptiles and amphibians. Um, so I also think that um, there's adding to knowledge. Things like documenting observations on iNaturalist or herp mapper, assisting in local monitoring and restoration programs. Um, and some of that kind of work is bearing witness, even if we can't hold on to them. I think that part is important to do. There's political advocacy, writing letters, phone calls, and then take care of your own energy and love and capacity to act. And I'm thinking there of that quote earlier from Joanna Macy about how we basically get overwhelmed and could fall into despair if we're not careful. So remember that the massive perils facing life on Earth make us want to shut down. Take care of yourself. There's effective action comes mostly from communities of people acting together. Um, I would recommend that you find ways of joining others face to face if you can. There's all this cool stuff around here. I mean, when you think about the stuff, you go through the ACC newsletter and you find the work at the Wildscape and other preserves like Sherry Capehart. And a lot of those are face to face where you meet out there, you go for a walk or you do some restoration work. You get to know other people in your face to face. And to me, and I'm drawing on my psychology background here, so for what it's worth, my opinion is that face-to-face real people contact is more important than social media contact, although everything has its place. I think we should hold ourselves accountable for doing something, but be careful not to hold ourselves accountable for doing everything. Don't become overwhelmed that way. And spend time reconnecting with well, first of all, reconnect others with nature. If the way you talk about nature, the way you go with others on walks, um, postings on social media might maybe reconnect others with nature and spend some time yourself reflecting on what we have, expressing gratitude for what we have, and recharging yourself by spending time in nature. So that is, I wanted to cover everything and I went a little bit fast and I didn't. There may be some things in chat. I know that Grace said 58% of herp species in Texas are threatened or endangered. How does that compare with other states' data? And is there a concerted effort nationwide or continent-wide? And my best answer would be to look at stuff like NatureServe and the IUCN Red List to see how they're listing things. It's quite variable. Um, and Viviana is saying not a lot of other states keep data. And yeah, that back to what I was saying in that slide where with so many species, we simply don't know. And you could almost make the blanket statement, we simply don't know. And what we have with our best efforts is we have some data, we have some inkling of how things might be doing, but it's such a mammoth task that we simply don't know in so many cases. Um, are there other things that I missed? And are there other questions that you have now? While you're thinking about that, I would say that the three, there's always got to be some kind of plug, huh? Sorry about that. The books that I've written are listed here. Herping Texas is a somewhat longer book written with Clint King of our travels around Texas, all the different ecosystems over a course of about 10 years. Lots of natural history in that one. The Wild Lives of Reptiles and Amphibians I wrote to be a kind of an introduction to wild herps as wildlife in North America and their natural history. And so it's a good introductory book, I think. It's as a young herpetologist guide because I tried to write it so it would be accessible to like preteens, teenagers, um, but it's also for adults. It's not written like a kid's book, I don't think. The latest one is Mindfulness in Texas Nature, which is a slightly different topic, but there you go. Viviana mentions that there is a shop. There's cool t-shirts. I want to tell you, man, and caps and t-shirts and stuff. If you go to texasturtles.org to the shop, to the merch page, you'll find some cool stuff. Grace asks, I'm wondering if disappearance of their prey may be responsible for herp declines. And a good example would be horned lizards, because one factor in the disappearance in some places of horned lizards is the virtual disappearance or the decline at any rate in harvester ants. So that you remember, well, so when I was a kid, there were those big cleared areas of the big red harvester ant in people's yards and parks and kind of all over the place. And we just kind of went on an orgy of poisoning ants and knocked the harvester ants back quite a bit. Also, fire ants compete with harvester ants, and that's part of the problem with harvester ants. So harvester ants are gone from a lot of places. And so so you're not going to have horned lizards if you don't have the ants. They're not going to eat the fire ants, by the way. So yeah, when these things reverberate. If you have loss of prey, you have loss of things up and down the food chain. Dick is asking, do kids get more excited by some herps than others? What is a good species to start introducing herps to kids? Uh, my own experience, I've talked to a lot of a lot of kids groups. One animal I've taken around to a lot of those groups is a great big, very tame bull snake. So if you remember the way that Louisiana pine snake looked, um, bull snakes look a little bit like that, and they get easily 6 feet long. And when you get one that's tame and gentle, the kids get everybody gets pretty excited about a snake that big. Um, so that's one kind of answer, I guess. I used to have a Texas garter snake that someone donated to me, who died eventually of old age, or I think old age. Um, and telling that animal story just a little bit, some kids would pick up on, oh man, they're endangered and they're not being protected. I wish someone would protect them. So there are ways to reach out to kids uh, by using live animals, by using stories. even by using books. And I don't mean, well, interesting books with younger kids, maybe picture books, lots of things. So I don't know. I'm not sure what is a good species. I think box turtles are very, now I don't want to encourage anybody to go collect a box turtle, right? Please don't do that. But a box turtle is a great ambassador animal just because people tend to like box turtles. Um, Woodhouse toads are pretty good ambassador animals. Anyway, I don't want to get too hung up in all of that, but that's my thought about it. Let's see.
Michael, earlier Grace had asked a question related to what they eat. She asked, other than horned lizards, are most herps generalists in their diets?
No, it varies quite a bit. It's like I bet you could find an equivalent sort of thing with birds, right? Where there's lots of them that are generalists and lots of them that are specialists. So here's an example. The Graham's crayfish snake eats only, well, virtually only crayfish. Like never say never, right? But that's the mainstay of their diet. And they really prefer freshly molted crayfish. So that's a prey specialist for sure. And so that means whatever happens to the crayfish happens to the snakes. There's others that are like some garter snakes are fairly generalist in their diets. There are snakes like Texas rat snakes that will eat like their prey base is not likely to suffer too badly, right? They eat lots of rodents, rats, mice. They will eat fledgling birds. They usually can pick up a meal. So it varies quite a bit. Let's see. And so Viviana says, shameless plug. Yeah. That's okay, Viviana. It's a well-deserved plug. Randall Mill Park, Dick says, has probably 15 large harvester ant colonies. Yay! How many harvester ants are needed to try and introduce horned toads back into a setting? That's a great question. And the answer is that it needs to be bigger than that. And I don't, I, and so we need somebody from Parks and Wildlife, somebody from one of the zoos. Andy Glusenkamp, who used to be the conservation director uh, at the San Antonio Zoo, or some of the folks from Fort Worth could answer. They've looked at that kind of stuff when they've decided about where to try to reintroduce them. But basically the answer is it needs to be a big enough area that would support a population. And what that means is if it's a small area, something that might knock the population back a little bit that would be survivable in a big area wouldn't be survivable in a small area. I could say similar kinds of things about you know, the Yucca Meadow at Sherry Capehart Nature Preserve. People have wondered about that sometimes because they've got Comanche harvester ants, but it's a small little patch. And so it's not big enough to support um, a population. So Donna says, so many people use chemicals in their yards for different purposes. That has to have a huge effect. Um, I don't and love my spiny lizards. Good for you, Donna. That's great. And yeah, I think that's true. I think if you poison the insects, then that also reverberates up and down the food chain. So you could poison whatever eats insects that have been into pesticides. They vary in how sensitive they are. I don't know this area real well, but my understanding is that the Gulf Coast toad, which has largely replaced the Woodhouse's toad in the cities, is a little more resilient to disturbed habitats and maybe water quality than Woodhouse's toad. So once again, it kind of varies by species. Um, Grace says, what do you answer to people who ask, why do you care about the June sagebrush lizard? You don't have to keep it clean. No, so what I would always want to do would be to reply to somebody like that in a way that doesn't alienate them, because if there's any possibility of them becoming an ally and becoming somebody that's willing to protect them, I don't want to run them off. A little bit of it is that thing I said about everything counts. the Aldo Leopold quote, if you remember that, you know, the thing about only a fool would discard the seemingly useless parts. You can appeal even to some folks' religion, not everybody, of course, but some folks' religion, because the quote is almost equally valid if you substitute the creator for the biota. So, in other words, if the creator over the course of eons has created something that we like but don't understand. So, in other words, you know, from a religious standpoint, at least in the older school Christianity, there was the idea of stewardship and that we are supposed to take care of this garden. There is, of course, the Jenga thing that I talked about, where you mess up one thing, it reverberates in ways that you can't always anticipate, and just and kind of for our own good. And this, you know, this is philosophical, and I don't know that many people could relate to it. It's like when we acknowledge, when we think that we are just sort of brothers and sisters, sort of borrowing from the Native American thought, the indigenous ideas about everything else in nature. If we're fellow brothers and sisters, uh, then we have an obligation to take care of everything. We don't judge. It's not our place to judge. Okay, we can throw this away and keep that. So anyway, those are my offhand thoughts about that. Dick says, are some schools very good at exposing their students to herps? This is information rarely mentioned in schools. That also, I think, varies a lot. One of the nice things here in Arlington is, oh, I'm sorry, I'm losing track of where I am in the chat. We have the River Legacy Nature Center and Living Science Center. They do a lot of stuff, and I know they do a lot of things for the schools. I've done school talks before, but not a lot. I'm doing some stuff with a Montessori school. I'm thinking that private schools might be doing more, but I'm not sure. I have done some stuff for public schools as well. I guess the answer is I don't really know how good schools are doing at some of this. And he also asked, are domestic cats a big issue? So this is the part where I do alienate half of you, or hopefully not, right? I hope I don't. I like cats. Um, I have to say that you know where I'm going, right? If I start by saying I like cats, you know that this is not going well anyway. So, but domestic cats are a huge issue. Cats outdoors are a huge issue, that is. Indoor cats are not. Indoor cats are great. Outdoor cats kill enormous numbers of wildlife. There are bird extinctions, as I recall, attributed to feral cats and outdoor cats, but they also eat any small animal that they can catch, and that includes herps. So yeah. Grace says, other than supporting organizations like you mentioned, what can the small homeowner do to protect the herps that we may have? So this is on a small scale. I mean, I think the things like not using pesticides. I think the things like if you have a water feature in your yard or even in a garden where you have some upturned clay pots or other things that could be a shelter for things like toads or lizards. That's a useful thing to do in your yard. So that those things come to my mind. I mean, you could make a wildscape of your yard, and that's good for everything. It's going to benefit so many things, everything from pollinators to potentially toads and lizards and things like that. So on a small scale, yes, you're doing something really good if you do something with your yard. So Viviana has beat me to the punch. Plant native plants in your yard, absolutely. Will help so many native animals, including herps. Absolutely, Viviana. Totally agree. Um, so anything else from anybody? I know we're running a bit over, but I really appreciate all your questions very much, and I hope that I'm giving halfway coherent answers to them. I do have some things in at the website. Lives in Nature thing that I mentioned. One of the things that I have is okay. A series of, and now I've lost track of myself. Pardon me, folks. I have a series of, oh yeah, my blurred background is gonna see if I can do anything about that. So I have a series of sort of information sheets that are downloadable. If you're talking to a homeschool group, or you just want it for your own self, like this one on the alligator snapping turtle front and back, this one on the Texas garter snake front and back, has some information about, what do they look like, how you identify them, where they're found, how they live, can they hurt you, how do they defend themselves, that kind of stuff. And then the blog posts that I do are sometimes and those things that I just showed you are downloadable from the herpetology page of my website. Anyway, I'm going on and on. I'm going to stop, but thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Well, we thank you very much, Michael. That was very informative and had some encouraging information there.
Thank you. Yeah, we need all the encouraging stuff that we can get, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you.